Yeah, it's really challenging. Students often perceive it as boring, as a chore, something that has to be endured as opposed to enjoyed.
We have to deal with housing, and we have to deal with jobs, and how to allocate those out is also very important. And also we have to have those other attributes of living: culture, religion, arts, ethics. And all of those things are brought together in dealing with planning, law, and property rights.
Informality and informal land use. But as it turns out, and as we have been looking to all sorts of places around the world, we can see that informal land uses and informality really are important.
One of the important topics to discuss when we talk about planning, law, and property rights is the way that planning influences property rights. It does so with instruments or tools of land policy. So these instruments are public policy interventions in the allocation and distribution of land.
One process that I would like to flag is the erosion of local planning. And I think this is a matter that is gaining steam and interest around the world, also internationally. When you see local governments being trumped, circumvented, their decision-making is being circumvented by upper-tier national or even federal governments because of many reasons, because national governments want better housing, faster pace of development, then you see gradually the erosion of planning happening all around us.
We're going to be looking at the impulses coming from various parts of international law upon the way in which domestic and even local planning law and property rights operates.
I do a lot of work on coastal settings. We're seeing huge dynamic shifts in shorelines and flooding patterns and such. And that really brings to the fore questions about what does it mean to own property in those dynamic settings, and can we expect that that property is going to be there forever and not change given these dynamic forces? And once you start thinking about property rights that way, then you get into legal questions about, well, what are my rights under the law in this dynamic setting? And is the legal system really well tuned to what's going on in terms of the true dynamics? And then finally, how do we plan for that? How do we understand those dynamic systems and what the implications are for property rights and through our legal systems?
Environmental governance of climate change adaptation. It simply means that the climate is changing and this brings more natural hazards, and the society needs to somehow adapt to these increased risks. So for example, you need to deal with land uses, planning of cities. You need to talk to land users and convince them how to change land use practices. So you need to, especially to focus on different planning practices. You need to address property rights issues. That's the key. And of course, you need to design new regulation tools.
We need to rely on the instruments that we've had from the past, the ones that we're using now, and new ones for the future. And I'm interested in some of these new ones for the future. I'm interested in big data and advanced technologies and how they can work with land use planning and development, but also property rights to create more inclusive and equitable environments for the people who live.
They follow a certain logic, a certain interpretation between the state and the individual. And it is important to reveal the inherent normative notion of instruments of land policy. And therefore we need to discuss it in the realm of planning, law, and property rights.
Law, planning, property rights for a long time have been considered to be instruments of formality. For a while, there was an assumption that informality is about the global South and formality is for Western planning and property systems. But as it turns out, this is not the case. It's just the case that Western planners often do not understand the degree of informality that they can watch every day in their planning practice, and often they are not really good in using that.
a shared aspect across many of those topics in terms of the identification and of the strengths and weaknesses and the resolution or alleviation of contemporary issues that we face is learning, it's education. So I think we really need to rethink some of those pedagogical styles, approaches, techniques, and think about how we can ensure that students not only come to understand or be knowledgeable about planning law, but also enthusiastic for it, passionate about it, more intellectually curious about it. And that's a challenge.